Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, we're headed to the small hours of April 12th, 1861, in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, where state forces are about to unleash hell in the form of a massive artillery bombardment on U.S. Army Major Robert Anderson and his garrison inside Fort Sumter. For weeks, the officers and men lived on meager rations while they helplessly watched the buildup of gun emplacements and fortifications around them, erected by their former fellow citizens, now part of the nascent Confederate States of America, with little instruction from Washington, D.C. during the transition of power from the administration of James Buchanan to Abraham Lincoln. One of Major Robert Anderson's subordinate officers is pictured here. Abner Doubleday, life dates 1819 to 1893, West Point class of 1842, Mexican War veteran, a supporter of the abolition of slavery, who voted for Abraham Lincoln in 1860, and as captain, second in command to Major Anderson. In 1876, now Major General Doubleday told his story of the early days of the war in his book, Reminiscences of Fort Sumter and Moultrie in 1860 to 1861. I want to share part of the book, a chapter titled Bombardment, in which Doubleday details the beginning of the bombardment and his role in firing the first shot in return. It begins. As soon as the outline of our fort could be distinguished, this, of course, at 4:30 a.m. on April 12th, the enemy carried out their program. It had been arranged as a special compliment to the venerable Edmund Ruffin, who might almost be called the father of secession, that he should fire the first shot against us from the Stevens Battery on Cummings Point. And I think in all the histories, it is stated that he did so, but it is attested by Dr. Crawford and others at Samuel Crawford, who were on the parapet at the time, that the first shot really came from the mortar battery at Fort Johnson. Doubleday adds a footnote at this point and says, I have since learned that the shell from Fort Johnson was not a hostile shot, but was simply intended as a signal for the firing to commence. Doubleday continues, almost immediately afterward, a ball from Cummings Point lodged in the magazine wall and, by the sound, seemed to bury itself in the masonry about a foot from my head, in very unpleasant proximity to my right ear. This is the one that probably came with Mr. Ruffin's compliments. In a moment, the firing burst forth in one continuous roar, and large patches of both the exterior and interior masonry began to crumble and fall in all directions. The place where I was had been for the manufacture of cartridges, and there was still a good deal of powder there, some packed and some loose. A shell soon struck near the ventilator, and a puff of dense smoke entered the room, giving me a strong impression that there would be an immediate explosion. Fortunately, no sparks had penetrated inside. 19 batteries were now hammering at us, and the balls and shells from the 10-inch Columbiads, accompanied by shells from 13-inch mortars, which constantly bombarded us, made us feel as if the war had commenced in earnest. When it was broad daylight, I went down to breakfast. I found the officers already assembled at one of the long tables in the mess hall. Our party were calm and even somewhat merry. We had retained one colored man to wait on us. He was a spruce looking mulatto from Charleston, very active and efficient on ordinary occasions, but now completely demoralized by the thunder of the guns and the crashing of the shot around us. He leaned back against the wall, almost white with fear, his eyes closed, and his whole expression one of perfect despair. Here, Doubleday adds another footnote. He writes, in this, He was an exception to most Negroes. Those I have seen in the colored regiments in Texas have shown themselves to be among the best and most reliable men in the service for operations against the Indians. It was a line of Negroes that charged over the torpedoes at Mobile. Doubleday continues his narrative. Our meal was not very sumptuous. It consisted of pork and water, but Dr. Crawford, again, that's Samuel Crawford, triumphantly brought forth a little farina, which he had found in a corner of the hospital. When this frugal repast was over, my company was told off in three details for firing purposes to be relieved afterward by Seymour's company. That's Truman Seymour. As I was the ranking officer, I took the first detachment and marched them to the casemates, which looked out upon the powerful ironclad battery of Cummings Point. In aiming the first gun fired against the rebellion, I had no feeling of self reproach, for I fully believed that our contest was inevitable and was not of our seeking. The United States was called upon not only to defend its sovereignty, but its right to exist as a nation. The only alternative was to submit to a powerful oligarchy who were determined to make freedom forever subordinate to slavery. To me, it was simply a contest, politically speaking, as to whether virtue or vice should rule. My first shot bounded off from the sloping roof of the battery opposite without producing any apparent effect. It seemed useless to attempt to silence the guns there, for our metal was not heavy enough to batter the work down, and every ball glanced harmlessly off, except one which appeared to enter an embrasure and twist the iron shutter so as to stop the firing of that particular gun. I observed that a group of the enemy had ventured out from their entrenchments to watch the effects of their fire, but I sent them flying back to their shelter by the aid of a 42-pounder ball, which appeared to strike right in among them. Assistant Surgeon Crawford, having no sick in the hospital, volunteered to take command of one of the detachments. He and Lieutenant Davis were detailed at the same time with me, and I soon heard their guns on the opposite side of the fort echoing my own. They attacked Fort Moultrie with great vigor. Our firing now became regular and was answered from the rebel guns, which encircled us on the four sides of the Pentagon upon which the fort was built. The other side faced the open sea. Showers of balls from 10-inch Columbiads and 42-pounders and shells from 13-inch mortars poured into the fort in one incessant stream, causing great flakes of masonry to fall in all directions. When the immense mortar shells, after sailing high in the air, came down in vertical direction and buried themselves in the parade ground, their explosion shook the fort like an earthquake. Our own guns were very defective as they had no breech sights. In place of these, Seymour and myself were obliged to devise notched sticks, which answered the purpose but were necessarily very imperfect. Our fort had been built with reference to the penetration of shot when the old system of smoothbore guns prevailed. The balls from the new Blakely gun on Cummings Point, however, had force enough to go entirely through the wall which sheltered us, and some of the fragments of brick which were knocked out wounded several of my detachment. None were seriously hurt except Sergeant Thomas Kernan of my company. His contusions were severe, but did not keep him out of the fight. After 3 hours firing, my men became exhausted, and Captain Seymour came with a fresh detachment to relieve us. He has a great deal of humor in his composition and said jocosely, "Doubleday, what in the world is the matter here, and what is all this uproar about?" I replied, "There is a trifling difference of opinion between us and our neighbors opposite, and we are trying to settle it." "Very well," he said. "Do you wish me to take a hand?" I said, yes, I would very much like to have you go in. All right, he said. What is your elevation and range? I replied, 5 degrees and 1,200 yards. Well, he said, here goes. And he went to work with a will. So there you have the passage, the opening passage, in fact, of the chapter titled Bombardment in Abner Doubleday's reference, his great primary source reference, his reminiscences and memoirs of the action at Fort Sumter on April 12th, 1861. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War, a research trail.